I will ask the panelists to provide a brief introduction of themselves and how you've come to connect with your anti-trafficking work. So who's going to start with an introduction and how you came to connect with the anti-trafficking work?
I think I was going to start before I put the echo on voice.
Sure, go ahead.
So my name is Kilomarie Granda. I am executive director of a very small nonprofit that's been around for 9 years. So we celebrated our 10th year last year and next year. And I'm super excited about it. It's kind of like having a child, birthing a child, raising a childhood, teenage years. I feel like have already happened for me in the organization. But I came to this work because I'm a victim survivor. The nonprofit work that I do is all about violence prevention, bystander intervention, education, reform, policy change, to really amplify the voices of those who are unheard and systemically and individually silenced by power-based violence. My master's is in criminal justice, specializing in prevention, intervention, and rehabilitation. I hold an LAPC, 2 bachelor's degrees in counseling and psychology and Christian ministries. And partway through my PhD, although I had to give it up, because did you know there's a lifetime limit on what you can get for your federal Pell Grant? There is. I found that out. And I hit it. So then I had to stop school 3 years in. I have 1 more year left of my PhD and hopefully getting that done. So I came from a really poor background. I was trafficked as a youth all over the country. And for me, growing up in such poverty, homelessness, in the slums or rural places without electricity, that kind of stuff, it really made a difference and impacted me. I was trafficked all the way through until age 18, and throughout my life since then, despite my education, despite the work that I do, for a variety of reasons, including the fact that I have disabilities, I have found myself in that loop of exploitation, being victimized again and again and again. And so, I hear about, how easy it is to re-exploit some of us that have gone through this, and it's really not because anything to do with us. It's to do with the system that doesn't understand us and the support that isn't there. So when I hear things like this today, knowing they're moving forward, that there will be that in the future, I think it's just amazing. So, but yeah, so I come to this work for a bunch of different reasons. One of the big things that I like to talk about that isn't talked about enough is in the correlation and the overlap between individuals with disabilities, cognitive, intellectual, and physical, and trafficking. So we really don't talk about it. I think it needs to have its own space. So anyway, that's a lot. I said I don't like my own voice, and then I talked for like 10 minutes. So we're just gonna, there you go.
Thank you. My name is Ronny, Marty. Originally from the Dominican Republic. I'm also about myself, a labor trafficking, and I'm an anti-human trafficking consultant. So I'm independent. I don't belong to any organization because I like to say whatever I think it's right. So I don't have a stamp for anybody. But I collaborate with so many organizations, with governments, with a lot of stakeholders, and also provide trainings to the federal agencies and state agencies as well, and also work with the community too. I love to really raise the awareness about labor trafficking specifically, because it's always left behind, and that's why we raise our voice and make sure people are listening and taking action too. So I love the movement. I'm not fully involved in the movement because it's really not easy to deal with so many things that's going on right now, but I do my best to have my voice at the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Ronny. Hello, good morning to you all. My name is Hounakey. I'm a survivor of trafficking, labor trafficking. What else did you share? I'm spacing out. Okay. Okay. Why did I join the movement? I actually started after trafficking. I was in foster care for all my childhood and adult till I aged out. And then after I aged out, I noticed that, we all say we want to give back. I didn't know what that meant, so I went to school, got my bachelor's in criminal justice in Spanish, lived abroad for a little bit, and then came back and got my master's in social work. I'm a trained clinician, but right now I work for the government. I work for an Office of Refugee Resettlement, working with migrants crossing the borders from Central and South America. And that's allowed me, that's my professional job, but my really passion is advocacy for survivors of crime, including human trafficking, to sort of encourage representation so that people don't see us as just survivors, they see us as individuals that something happened to see us as professionals, to see us in our own light, to see us as parents, as business owners, to really give voice to all of us to say, you know, this happened to us, but we're not defined by it. This happened to us, but that's not the only identity we assume. That we're so colorful, like many of you who might have stories. We are the same way too. And not see us as this fragile, broken people, but see us as empowered people with voice that are roaring everywhere. So that's why I'm a part of this movement. I love working alongside survivors or experts by experience, because together we just echo, but not from a place of pain, but from joy. So yeah. Did I talk more than you?
I don't know, but it was so
You were mentioning.
Okay, I was nice. Okay, I'll give this back to you.
So we will have time for audience questions, but we're going to kind of prime the pump, so to speak, and ask a couple of beginner questions. So for our panelists, our audience, both online and present, may be at different levels of understanding of labor trafficking, of engaging with subject matter experts with lived experience. What would you say is some of the most important things we need to know, either as a beginner or as someone who's been working in the field for a while, about working to end labor trafficking and engaging with subject matter experts?
Thank you. I think at all levels, what we first need to understand that labor trafficking is happening, and it is occurring everywhere, anywhere, and can happen to anybody. And that we have to open our minds and start listening more, because we still go out there and we talk about human trafficking and everybody's as assuming it's just sex trafficking. I've been so many years already, and still it's like the community is not involved, the community, they don't have enough awareness on that, or maybe some state agencies. So we just need to understand first that it's a crime that is happening. It could happen to anybody. It doesn't really discriminate anyone, regardless of where you're coming from. People think of because it might happen to the immigrants, it might happen to the refugees, it happen to the people that is in poverty. Yeah, they are target for the criminals, but it could happen to anyone who has a high level education as well. So, you know, and it's happening, and we need to do something to stop it. And that's the problem that we're having. So I think it's just to teach people or educate people on how to identify first labor trafficking, and then how to respond to that once you identify what to do. You know, what is the next step, and how to actually approach a victim of labor trafficking, and how to connect that victim with the resources if they are available. That usually for labor trafficking, we lack of resources, and you're gonna hear me talking about that all the time, because I don't like when people in power are talking about things that they are doing like some paper, but when you go to the reality, it's not happening. So still labor trafficking is lacking of resources for the victims and survivors of labor trafficking. So that's what gonna be, what I think is people should know. And like if you wanna do something, and if you wanna join, just by learning, listening, and acting, you can do a lot of things. You know, I always says that if you know the fact that what's going on, but you do nothing about it, you're part of the problem as well. So, thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Ronny. You know, with labor trafficking, we have to think about the elements of crime, right? Fraud, coercion, and force. And so for me, it's not to have a hierarchy of victimization. What do I mean by that? Not to say that sex trafficking is more difficult than labor trafficking, or to say that, you know, let's not have a hierarchy and say one is better than the other. Pain leaves us the trace pain leaves injury, and both for sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And it's an emerging crime, meaning that every single time we have ways to identify, ways to prosecute, ways to address resources, traffickers find a way to, be ahead of the game. They're very proactive, making sure that it's not detected, so they transition to become more of an organized crime. So we have to increase our effort. And so one thing about labor trafficking, at least I want to communicate today, is that it's an emerging industry for them. A lot of our resources in the past as a community, as organization, was focused solely on sex trafficking. And so we have to see the intersection and to see where are resources that can share based on what we've already done, and where are the gaps, and how can we fill those gaps. If we don't, then we're leaving some people behind. We don't want to create a community that leaves some people behind based on the crime. Yeah.
So my wheelhouse is definitely not labor trafficking. It is going to be your sex crimes, predatory crimes, but I see the overlap here, and I've seen it forever, because when I was being sex trafficked, I saw other people and other kids being, gun running and drug trafficked and being forced to work in factories and things like that. So there really wasn't so much of a difference between us. We all knew that we didn't have a way out. We were all broke, some of us undocumented, and we basically just, So what you said is so right. Like, we don't need to be comparing. I guess in a way, I do want to compare for a second, because I recently attended a training, heard a stat, like, I don't remember what it is. So maybe someone here will know it, but it's something about, like, in proportion between labor and sex trafficking cases only account for about 5% of all trafficking cases. 95% are unreported cases of labor trafficking. So I see sex trafficking as such a huge issue, but then I put that up next to, it's just a tiny, tiny bit of it compared to the thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people who are being trafficked, labor trafficked. So that's alarming to me. We need to stop sensationalizing crime and start really listening to the survivors, and just because it's sex trafficking doesn't mean it should get anything more or be more interesting than, yeah, so thank you.
I just want to add to that, and she was saying, we shouldn't be competing sex trafficking and labor trafficking. I mean, it's a crime, and they need action to be taken in order to really do something. And what I see, I was just checking the states that are on the higher risk with labor trafficking and labor trafficking cases. And I see the state of Minnesota, like, it's way down, like nothing is going on here. But it means, so you guys are doing a great job by detecting and providing services for victims and potential victims of labor trafficking. But nothing is being done and nothing being reported, or there's not enough awareness out there, because I'm pretty sure with the industry like agriculture and the construction that we have here, there's a lot of labor trafficking out there. Forced labor, I mean, you can name it. But what I want to say is, not because you don't hear about that, it's not happening. It's really happening, and that's why we need to take action now. And if we really do it, because I was part of the Advisory Council of Human Trafficking for the White House for 2 terms, and the main recommendation that we always have is like increase investigation. Just increase investigations, and the issue was always money. There was no budget for that. So, but how are you going to find out, how are you going to really see what's going on if you don't have investigators out there, making sure that labor trafficking is not happening? So.
That's a great point. Thank you. I turned my mic off so I didn't accidentally cough into the microphone while you were all speaking, and then forgot. Of course, it's just like Zoom world. You forget to unmute. All right, so moving on a little bit, thinking, you kind of referenced this a little bit here about where we might be in the state of Minnesota as far as our efforts to address labor trafficking. Let's think about this both federally and statewide across the country, and maybe even more locally in our communities. How far do you think we have come in addressing labor trafficking and providing those resources and those investigations federally, statewide, across the country, and more locally?
Do you guys want me to start? Who wants to volunteer as tribute? Who wants to volunteer as tribute? Okay. You know, thank you for that. I think it's important to notice the where we started and where we are and how far along we have to go. When federally, there wasn't a lot. We have to look at, there is less than, I want to say, 20 prosecuting convicted cases of labor trafficking, right? It's not that it's not happening, it's just that it's really, really hard. No, that's okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay. So, yes, Bella Hounakey, U.S. Advisory Council on Human Trafficking, Honorable Ronny and myself and Honorable Kola, we were part of the White House Advisory Council on Human Trafficking. We advised the President of Interagency Task Force on like, hey, government, this is what you need to do federally. And so that's our little thing. What I was saying is that there is a very small number of convicted cases per capita in this country on people prosecuting or convicted people who are traffickers. And I don't think it's not that it's not happening. I think that people, you talk about sensationalizing crime, people see it as labor exploitation or something that has to do with wage or improper payment or some sort of that. They don't see the aspect of criminality. And so I think we have to continue to merge both the criminal aspect of it, it's an organized crime, to have people exploited using component of force, fraud, and coercion for your benefit of monetary gain. It's not something that's normal, nor should we normalize it. So I think federally, there is a lot of effort from all, both stakeholder, nonprofit, for-profit, to some extent, to have awareness of it. When we know what we're addressing, then we can potentially take efforts to fix it. And so I think there's been a lot of increased awareness. Like we're doing now, we're having a conversation about labor trafficking, what it is, the trends we see. So I think federally, there's been efforts to educate, which I think speaks to the prevention aspect of the law, what is the law again? TVPA. The TVPA. How many of you know what the TVPA is? Raise your hand a little high. Okay, everybody know. The Trafficking Victims Protection Act. It determines how traffic victims migrate through the system after they've been found or identified. Same thing with traffickers. You prosecute traffickers, you're supposed to give justice to victims. So I think that law was created to better the outcome of trafficking survivors. So I think we've done a lot as a country, as people, as communities, but the large gap is continuing, I want to say self-identification. How can we do things so that people who are being exploited can say, I think I'm being trafficked. Where can I go to get help? And so we need to do more of that in all levels, I think.
Also, with labor trafficking, I've seen some improvement, a lot of achievement, I can say, because before, it was not actually existing. About labor trafficking, nothing. And because we've been raising our voices and just, claim that something needs to be done, things are happening. And it's happening first at the federal level. And I'm a witness, I can testify on that, because when I was in the Advisory Council, I saw all the efforts from the federal agencies that they tried, and they did their best. There was something that couldn't really implement because it takes so many other factors for them to implement, but they've been working on that. And they've been listening, which is always said is the most important thing, that they listened what survivors have to say at a table. And my problem is seeing that what is being done at the federal level is not going down to state levels. That's a problem that I've seen by when we visit states and we talk about labor trafficking. Sometimes, and I don't want to, I love law enforcement. The good law enforcement, I love them because they are always protecting us, working for us, and I love them. But I just dislike when you go to a place and you try to, provide a training and people are not willing to do anything because they have their standard and nobody's going to change how they are, but that has to change at all levels. Talking about the states, so that they are willing to be trained on how to work with victims and survivors of human trafficking, and especially to learn more about labor trafficking. I know, and it's not only the state's agencies or the federal agencies, but at all levels, people, they don't want to really know much about labor trafficking. I know how difficult it is to find the signs, like how can I identify someone who is a potential victim of labor trafficking. There's a lot of signs that we can talk about, and that's why to be trained properly on this issue about labor trafficking, that's the key. And I have seen a lot of improvement, as I said, but it's a lot of work to do still. So it's a long way, and I'm glad Bukola was always sharing with me about what's going on in Minnesota. And I'm glad about the bill that they were introduced. It was introduced in March 1st, I believe. It was the SF 2269 bill that's gonna is advocating for have some money to provide services to victims of labor trafficking and forced labor. That's it. To see that to me is amazing. So it's a step that we're going forward and we know what we're gonna do. So once the legislators are listening, they will put more attention and they will do more things for what is need to be done in the moment.
I'm going to just add something off the wall here, but one of the things when you were talking about training is, and what labor trafficking, the signs, things like that, I feel like maybe it's back to sensationalism, but, and it happens with sex trafficking as well. Do you ever see the posters where everybody's like really young and like they're your stereotypical, I don't think we consider the fact that people over 40, 50, 60, 70, whatever, are at a very high risk for actually being trafficked. So I just want to include that, because again, with the training, we need to focus more than just on what everybody is typecasting it to be. So, yeah.
Thank you, that's really great. All right, we're going to open this up to audience questions. I would just like to remind everyone that our panelists have agreed to come into this space to share their expertise with us. We want this to remain a safe space for them, and so if you have a question, please ask yourself first if you would want someone to ask that of you in front of a group. So just keep that in mind. Do we have any questions from our audience? Yes, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you for the mic runner.
Question that I have, could you share a success that you have experienced in your role as a subject matter expert making changes around anti-trafficking response? Any success that you have experienced?
I don't know how to qualify that, but I think I would say that success for me, if I were to capture it, it would just be how I define success, and that's justice. For me personally, is the ability to look at myself and say, you know what? You're not defined by what happened to you. You're not defined by statistics, Like, I remember when I was in foster care, all these groups of people would come and talk to us about their success stories. But there was always this undertone as if we were not ever going to achieve that sort of success. Because, statistically, foster carers are more likely to go to juvenile justice system and they don't graduate, blah, blah, blah. But then I never, like my identity, it's not based on what I've been through or what will happen. My identity is that I am. And so cultivating that is what I see as success. And being in a room of people, if they're policymakers, if there are industries, if there are other people in supply chain or whatnot, and be able to speak to them and say, you know what, I'm a peer. And recently, as of last week, I was testifying in front of Congress, and I was trying to elevate things that I think are important. And then I can see that, you know what, I'm not in this alone. I'm not in this alone. So that's what I say, Sarah, as like success is being able to cultivate. Because what trafficking attempts to do is erase your identity. In isolation, you can believe almost anything about yourself. I mean, anything about yourself. And I think traffickers really target your identity to your core. So long after trafficking ends, then you have to really like, what am I? Who am I? Where am I? But then being able to recultivate your identity is something that I've worked tirelessly to do, not from a place of anger or pain, but from a place of peace. And so no matter what heights I go, I always say, you know what? I'm a success story, not because I want to defy the odds or the statistic, it's because I want to recultivate who I think I am at my core. So that's success to me.
Thank you. I just want to add to what you were saying, success. You know, I've seen so much already, and an example is Bukola and her organization. I mean, before you wouldn't see a survival, leading organizations, and the work that have been done by Bukola and others, survivals have been amazing in the movement. So this is success, what I call success. But also, before a few years ago, you could see organizations just to have survivals not at the table, if no survival input in their work, because they need to check mark like, hey, I'm a survival informant, we're doing this with survivors. That wasn't true, but now things are being taken seriously. I think it's a success that people can really. I've been listening to what we gotta say, and now we have a voice at the table. So I think that's been very successful.
For me, success is just getting up another day. That's it sometimes, right? I get tired and exhausted, and I can try to focus on the accomplishments, and sometimes I'm able to. For me, that means I'm working with quite a few larger corporations, nationally and internationally, around aerospace and the development of our cislunar orbit space and our, space. I'm working with space people, and I am introducing, talking about these laws, introducing how are we going to stop what's already happened here in this world, and in this country, all the countries. How are we going to stop that? If we're moving to another planet, we're planning on going ahead and we're going to be exploiting the planet. Obviously, we're going to need people to exploit the planet, right? So how can we stop that before it happens? How can we be proactive about that? Because we've got people going into space here in the next 5 to 10 years, and we need to start looking at, and what happens if there's a sexual assault in space? There's no laws, there's nothing. So that's kind of, that's my success. I think also being able to be called on for my areas of expertise, which is, again, I'm autistic, so like to even be here talking and being able to that for me is a success. And being able to talk to organizations about it and about how can we treat our kids, our adults, how can we treat those individuals who are coming into the system? They're already traumatized. But for those who have autism or are mute or any other intellectual, cognitive, physical disability, how much harder is it? And how much easier is it to continue re-exploiting those people? And so I just, those are my successes. If I wrote them down, I was like, yay. But to be honest, it really just is getting up every day and doing something proactive and good to try to change what we have as a world. So.
Yes. Let me see. Can we get you a mic? Hold on.
I'm so sorry. I'm just holding on to it here.
So thanks for all your expertise and insight. My question is, I'm on the board of the Anytime Story, and this idea of how do we prevent this? How do we teach from a very young age? Because we're teaching a lot of different things to little kids to keep them safe. And I know that trafficking is even as adults, it's so difficult for us to talk about. But I really think that at some point we need to really focus on teaching kids from a very young age. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, and yes, that. We also need to be educating families and other individuals, but we need to know that really it's with our youth, right? there's a quote that I really like, and it's what's learned in the cradle lasts to the grave. So I feel like we need to be starting some of these principles just of behavior at a very young age. And then following it up, we need to be talking about this in pre-K and Head Start, and why are we not? You know, I think there's a way to do it without, you know, the biggest thing that I've heard, especially from rural schools, is that trafficking doesn't happen, and also we can't talk about the details of trafficking, especially sex trafficking or anything gross with labor trafficking. We can't talk about those things. It doesn't happen here. Unfortunately, it really happens in rural areas, and so we do need to be talking about it. And I think it would be more normalized if we brought it into the classroom and into our schools, into our churches, you know, our pre-Ks, whatever, daycares. I think it would have a lasting impact. So.
Thank you. I think that needs to start with the family. Since I have my kids, since they were little, I've been always telling them, hey, do not allow anybody to touch it. If they touch it, you gotta let me know. Don't be afraid that they're gonna probably threaten you with killing you or do some harm you or me. So that's from the beginning. That's the principle and foundation that we have for the family. So we need to teach kids from the early age. They need to understand, you know, in with another language, of course, but we gotta let them know that they have rights and that they cannot allow anybody to really, you know, abuse them in any way. So if they learn from the early age, they will be ready to get prepared if something happens out there, you know, and the problem is that I see with families is, oh no, that's like you said, it's not happening. And it won't happen to my kids. That can happen to your kids, especially at a very early age that they don't understand well. But if you train them how to protect themselves and how to look for help, I mean, that's going to be a big difference. And they can really defend themselves out there, because you're not going to be 24 hours with your kids. But we need to start, and I know the Department of Education, they have some good programs to teach kids about human trafficking, and I really like that because regardless of the age, they start teaching them, you know, what is human trafficking, what is that about, and what you can do in case you're facing a situation that you feel coerced or you feel threatened by someone, and how to respond to that as a little kid. So I think we need to start teaching that. That's going to be a way to avoid from happening to others.
Thank you. How many of you remember receiving education about the women's suffrage movement? Yeah, history is one of my favorite subjects. And when we talk about prevention, protection, prosecution, there's a 4P policy, partnership, policy / and punishment. Yeah, we keep adding P's to the list, and we need to just be better at one. And so I think, I think about prevention a lot. What can we do? Because we're always reactive. And that's just the nature of it. But I think about the women's suffrage movement. How, there are so many issues that women in the 1920s were facing, partner violence and all other issues, and they just pick one point of advocacy, right to vote. And once they face right to vote, it started empowering women. Now we get to have bank accounts. We get to have a say in what we do. So I think in the anti-trafficking movement, prevention is so many, like how do we start, like we can't track it because it's so ever-changing. If the issue is so big, so if we could just focus on one prevention, what do we think of when we think prevention? So I think we can borrow certain things, modalities from other movements, because we know that the identity of traffickers are so different. They are transitioning to being an organized crime. And so, yes, if we address schools, then we're able to educate young people and say, listen, don't exploit each other for gain of any sort. But then we'll have to address the issues that their homes, how they're raising in their environment, largely depend on the kind of mental health they have. So there's just so many issues on issues. So in the trafficking movement, likewise, if we pick one thing, just like the women's suffrage movement, they've decided the right to vote and they push for that. Once they do that, everything else sort of fell into, we still have issues. But it's not like the 1920s anymore. Likewise, in the anti-trafficking movement, there is so much in the agriculture setting, the unaccompanied children that I work with, there's so many things going on there. In the foster cases, there's exploitation in every sub-industries. If we pick one thing, prevention, what do we think about when we think prevention? Is it economic empowerment for communities that suffers from poverty? Like, what is it can we fix? If we fix one thing, will that sort of open doors for the other things to just be addressed as a product of that? So I don't know if that addresses your question, but that's what I'm thinking about is we want to do so many things at the same time and we're dropping out all of them. If we just focus on one and improve one, then we won't be here talking about exploitation. It's not a good conversation to have.
Yeah, no, just want to add also, you're concerned about kids. There is one of our survival colleagues, she has an organization that the name is Moderator, and I love the way they create comic books for kids to teach about human trafficking in general. And because as it's a tough topic to deal with kids, to speak to the kids, in those comic books, it's amazing how they get trapped in the story that they're telling there, and like the advices for the kids to learn and how to protect themselves if they have any situation about human trafficking.
So I was just going to add that I think a big part of educating our youth is really education, and it's awareness. And I would see a success being in the movement being more normalization around the topic. So it's not as much of an uncomfortable topic for us to be having, If the stigmatization is gone, or at least reduced or diminished, we're going to see a lot more people, I would think, coming forward because they don't have maybe as much of that shame. But again, I think that we have to start young with those conversations. It has to be a cultural and societal shift. So
We have time for, I think, one more question, and there's one online. Do you think that re-messaging is important, like stranger danger?
Yes. There's a story of someone who's worked in the trafficking movement forever, and she told this to me, and I just loved it. She said, going from harm prevention to preventing harm changed everything. Harm prevention, everybody was like, oh wow, harm prevention, we've talked about this forever. What is harm prevention, etc. It's got this, this typecast belief about what it is, and she changed the words and a little bit of messaging, more than a little bit, but you know what I mean? That was enough, I think. So to really get people to listen.
Yeah, like you said, I believe changing the message would be collaboration. It's just to be inclusive in the work that we're doing. And just to get the partnership, to build that partnership is just changing the message, but understanding that we're not alone in this movement and that we have so many entities that we can count on, but just the collaboration part. Because I know by myself, I won't be able to do many things. And maybe I go to Congress and they're not gonna listen to me, but I go and I speak to my state senator or someone in power, and I collaborate with that person, I will be changing the message until it's listening. That's the thing. And I would do anything possible to make sure that my voice is heard.
Yes, I agree. I think, changing the message or restructuring the message is a part of it. I think the broader issue here is, again, addressing vulnerabilities. We can change the message, we can swing it, we can republish it, but as long as there's a subset of our society that is going through severe, intense vulnerabilities, we will, no matter how we change the message, it's almost like addressing the wound, not the actual illness. It's like addressing the symptoms, not the actual illness. So we have to continue to find a way to address the actual illness, not the symptoms, where we can provide, is it CPR or CPA? Which one? CPR. ESL problems. We can provide CPR to the symptoms, but we have to address the core. Why are people being vulnerable to exploitation? Going back to my point, in isolation and suffering, people will believe almost everything. Children don't want to resort into doing things to feed themselves. We have a society, our communities where people are starving. So even if we address stranger danger, that places danger outside of the home. There are families that people are being exploited in the home. So what does stranger danger do in that situation? It doesn't address anything. It's just a conversation. If you tell us, that's implying that we have identified the source of trafficking. It's not addressing what vulnerabilities increase the likelihood of that child. You know, we have a friend whose father exploited him. And this was a very affluent white male in America. His father was worth a lot of money. He was a neurosurgeon who exploited his boiled child for many, many years and used his boiled child to exploit other children in his community. This is not a person that was poor. This is not a person of a BIPOC community, a person of color community. This wasn't an issue of poverty. This wasn't an issue of money. This is a morality issue. As long as we have a subset in our community who are facing mental health issues of some sort, no matter how much we structure the language, no matter how much you bend the truth, it's still the truth. No matter how much we massage it. Sorry, don't. Okay.
Yeah, you can touch it.
Okay. No matter how much we massage it, the problem remains. And so I like the idea of stranger danger, but it's not realistic. It's just yeah.
All right, we are scheduled to be done at 11:30 for this panel, but there is one question on here that I would like to read out. And if we could just take a few minutes here to answer that, I think it would be really great. What is your opinion and experience with post-traumatic growth theories that you can heal in the midst of your trauma?
I think that's a bunch of bullshit, excuse me. I'm so sorry. I think it can be true, but if you're in the midst of trauma and you're continually having that wound pulled, you know, the scab, like you said, if you're continually, you have a hatchet wound, right? And you're trying to put a Band-Aid on it over and over and over again, it's not going to really work, right? You're not going to be able to take care of that hatchet wound. And so I feel like trying for people to try to heal from their trauma, they need a chance to rest. They need a chance to be around people who love and support them, or at least don't exploit them on a continuous basis, you know? So like and we see this in all types of fields, but, and what is healing for other people might be different, you know? So for me, going back into this work after being assaulted myself has, in a way, been extremely empowering. It's been great for my growth. On the other hand, it has actually led me to falling into worse situations of trafficking and poverty and etc. and those cycles of abuse because of the work that I'm in, because I'm having to relive my whole life over and over again. Choices my parents made for me. I was also really trafficked when I was young. And so, yeah, I personally, I don't think it's going to work for me. I don't think that will work.
Every case is different, it's unique. So people heal in different way. There are people that are healing through the process and are still working in the movement. But there are people that takes a long time to really heal what is inside them and not to be exposed to the triggers that they might have working in the movement or being around other survivors. So we have an alarm that is going on. Oh, is there you?
I'm so sorry.
So that's fine.
That's what I thought at first.
It's lunchtime, so we're gonna go there. But I mean, the healing goes, you know, it's different in every individual. It's totally different. Like in my case, I can tell you, you need to be a part at the beginning of the process and heal yourself first before you expose to others. And sometimes we feel like we're ready, and we're not ready. Especially when we hear in detail story of something that happened, and it just brings back all the things that you went through. It means that you're not ready. It takes, you know, for people, some people it takes longer than others, but in the process only you know. But I love about the survivor community because we are part of the healing each other. We support each other. And I'm gonna tell you, I was in an event in Punta Cana for 5 days, and there was a situation that one of the audience got mad at me because I was not speaking Spanish. Everything was in English, but they have the translator. And so she approached me, and there was a survivor with me, and she was like, almost yelling at me, but she's like, it's nothing personal. But then that survivor was tapping on me and say, hey, you got my support. Like, this is kind of the support that we need, and this is part of the healing that we have among each other.
I'll be quick, I know people are hungry. I think the question, as you heard from my colleagues, when we talk about trauma, treatment of complex trauma, that stems from childhood. Yes, we have, I mentioned that I'm a trained clinician, we have neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to grow itself. So we have the ability to grow. However, like you mentioned, you cannot heal in an environment that keeps hurting you. And you see that in many survivors of crime, trafficking included, that it isn't until you are in a stable, safe environment, that's when your journey of healing, however that means, begins to start. But again, there's so many that, the physiological response to pain and complexity of abuse and trauma, it targets your neurons. It targets your brain in the way that it rewires your brain. And so much that, I just turned 30 2 weeks ago. And it isn't until now where I've throughout my time, I was in foster care and I received mental health services. It isn't until now as a professional where I'm like, a few years ago, something is off about me. I'm accomplished in doing this thing, but there's this cloud that, no matter what, I can escape it. And I don't like to talk about that. This is my first time talking about it because there's a stigma that's associated with it. People look at you different because, okay, she's a little crazy. But it's not it. It's me trying to understand what happened to me that caused me to be this way. That as a professional, as a person in the community, as just a human, something is off about me. And I dedicated my entire paycheck to really resolving that. And it looked different at different stages. And now I'm trying different treatment modalities. Talk therapy no longer works for me. Now my brain received EMDR successfully. And so, but that's a privilege that other people don't have. And so when we talk about trauma theories that work there is not a prescription of a modality that works for a victim. Some people, it may be talk therapy, it may be EMDR, which is a type of mental health treatment. It may be religion. It may be exposure therapy. But it is so important for us to continue to advocate for resources. Federal level, government, these people need money to go to get services. It's not everybody who can afford therapy. It's not everybody who can say, I will use God as healing, because some survivors have experienced religious trauma. So we have to create a community where rehabilitation in form of support is seen in our action, and that will have to include, if you're in a community and therapists, or you're in a community where you do yoga. I know a survivor that responded very well to yoga through healing that way. We have to start putting those services in place to help people. If not, the modalities that we ascribe to, it's just prescriptive, and it doesn't work for everybody.
That's really great. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our panelists. We appreciate your presence here and your insight into this matter. Thank you for your patience in allowing us to answer that last question.
Well, thanks again to our panelists and our moderator. Another round of applause for them. Lots of really great insights, lots to think about. And thanks for giving us all of those ideas so that we can do this work. So thank you again.